Donald Trump has declared war on the House impeachment inquiry. The perils for the president in doing so are immense and could include adding a separate article of impeachment for obstructing the inquiry. That, of course, was one of the Nixon articles of impeachment. Donald Trump turning to stonewalling as the impeachment inquiry is soaring in terms of support from the American public, adopting the defiant posture of obstructing a probe that 58% of the American public supports, including nearly a third of Republicans, is so potentially damaging to the president politically that it's leading to questions today about what exactly the president is afraid that the diplomat scheduled to testify today would reveal. The New York Times writes this, quote, the decision to block Gordon Sondland, the U.S. ambassador to the EU, from speaking with 3 investigators for 3 House committees came just hours before he was to appear on Capitol Hill, provoking an immediate conflict with potentially profound consequences for the inquiry and for the president himself. Despite the Trump administration pulling the plug on today's planned testimony early this morning, there's already ample evidence from Sondland's text messages with other diplomats that he was deeply involved in the effort to get the Ukrainian president to investigate the Bidens. There's also a smoking gun text exchange in which he's confronted with the concern from another diplomat that military aid had been tied to the Ukrainians digging up dirt on the president's rival. Diplomat Bill Taylor wrote Sondland, quote, as I said on the phone, I think it's crazy to withhold security assistance for help with the political campaign. The New York Times reports on what Sondland did after he got that text message. Quote, after receiving the text, Mr. Sondland called Mr. Trump, who asserted it was false. Sondland then replied to Taylor's message, Bill, I believe you are incorrect about President Trump's intentions. The president has been crystal clear, no quid pro quos of any kind, and added, quote, I suggest we stop the back and forth by text. Now, NBC News has confirmed today that Sondland spoke with the president before sending that awfully on-message reply, and adds that there are more text messages between the officials that haven't yet been released to the public. And if the substance of all those communications were something that White House lawyers felt so good about, seems to me Sondland would be up on Capitol Hill right now telling that story, and Donald Trump would be live tweeting his own exoneration. But he's not. And that is where we start today with some of our favorite reporters and friends. With us at the table, White House reporter for The Washington Post, Ashley Parker, former acting Solicitor General Neal Katyal, national political reporter for Axios Jonathan Swan, and former U.S. Attorney and former senior FBI official Chuck Rosenberg. Let me start with you, Neal. It would seem that we already have a lot of evidence from this witness, all of it pretty incriminating for this president. What is the impact? It seems like the cons outweigh the pros, unless there's something I'm missing. Yeah, no, there's something huge going on here, because coming in, the president, I think, was suffering from the fact that there's all these text messages, all this stuff that shows Trump is guilty. So really his only hope was to have his pal Sondland come in and say, oh, no, that wasn't the case, trying to explain what happened and the like. And 3 hours before he's to testify, the White House pulls the plug on that. That's really suggestive of the fact that I think Sondland was going to come in and do the president no favors. The wind was definitely not at the president's back, and now it's blowing him down. And remember, Sondland's not just some person. He's a guy who works for you and me, the taxpayers. He's a public official, and they're blocking him from testifying. Something that they must be scared that he's going to say something bad. Can we go through the evidence that I just laid out? So the U.S. Bill Taylor, who's a diplomat working in Ukraine, sends a text and says, I think it's crazy to tie the military aid for Ukraine to a political campaign. And instead of writing back, no, that's not what we're doing, E.T. phones home and talks to the president, who's told more than 11,000 lies, and then gives that president's word to Bill Taylor, the diplomat, that no, there's no quid pro quo. And unless there are messages we haven't seen, he didn't ask if there was a quid pro quo. Quid pro quo seems to have been the cover story for these shenanigans from the beginning. Absolutely. We don't even know that the president said to Sondland, oh, there was no quid pro quo. What we have is a text message 5 hours after the one before it saying, hey, this is crazy. How can you tie this? And it's written and scripted like a bad lawyer would write it, like to a drug dealer, like,
oh, when you said Coke, you meant Coca-Cola, and speaking slowly or something like that. You know, it's the whole layout of the text messages one to another is incredibly suspicious. Oh, the messages before from Taylor and Sondland were minutes or seconds apart. Then there's this 5-hour gap, and then there's this highly scripted response. And of course, all the other evidence, Nicolle, is pretty damaging as well, from the memo that the White House sent over the July 25th phone call to the whistleblower report. All of this stuff is coming out, and this whistleblower is looking more and more like the one person who's told the truth from day one. And
we've got some breaking news about the whistleblower, but just quickly on the evidence that already exists. A former law enforcement official told me that if Sondland and Kurt Volker, who's the one diplomat who testified, whose testimony yielded all these rich sort of windows into what they were asking the Ukrainians to do, that they wanted this investigation to the Bidens, that if that operation had been rogue, the diplomats would have been fired. The sign that indicates most clearly that the orders came from on high, either from Pompeo or Donald Trump, were that those diplomats were not sanctioned or punished. And that if they testify, they may be asked, well, who told you to tie the investigation of the Bidens?
And by the way, career diplomats like Mr. Taylor don't tend to go rogue. I mean, they are used to receiving instructions and following them. And so I think your instincts, Nicolle, are exactly right. By the way, I also think Neal's instincts are right. It is scripted, and that to federal prosecutors like me seems suspicious. But I wanted to add one thing, if I could. It doesn't matter in some ways that Mr. Sondland is not going to testify. That happens all the time, right? We don't always get all the evidence we want in investigations. Yeah. Documents are missing. Witnesses don't tell the truth. I mean, good investigators, good agents build cases with imperfect information. I mean, is it troubling that he's not testifying? Of course. Would I like to hear from him? You bet. But can you make a case, whether it's a criminal case or impeachment, without him? Happens all the time.
And it would seem, Jonathan Swan, that this White House is running the Mueller playbook in a very, very, very different landscape. The Mueller probe took place behind closed doors. There really weren't a lot of witnesses. There was a big report that came out at the end. But this is the conduct in question happened on the White House property. Right. The transcript was released by the White House. There's really no straw man to point to. There's no deep state. This is Donald Trump's words released in Donald Trump's transcript by Donald Trump's aides, and this is a Trump-appointed ambassador.
Well, I think the view, certainly from the president, is that by saying things out loud in public and transparently, they are less bad than if you said exactly the same words privately in an email or on a phone call. And we're sort of seeing something that we've never really seen before, which is basically testing the public. I mean, there were people who used to work in the administration at a very senior level who were stunned when he released that transcript. Yeah. They were stunned. They thought, I mean, when he was saying, oh, I'm going to put it out tomorrow, it's perfect, they were expecting, like, you know, a perfect phone call. And, of course, we saw what we saw. But this is what they're doing. He's saying it out loud, and he's betting that by telling his people that this is perfect, that his people will agree with that and go along with that. It's quite remarkable.
The other problem they seem to have is that they've moved the goalposts several times. Their positioning now seems to be, as long as they can't prove a quid pro quo, I'm fine. I'm free. Is that right? That seems to be their public relations strategy, if not their legal one. All of the evidence that has emerged suggests that everyone that worked for him was operating as though there was absolutely a quid pro quo, that both a visit to the White House and the release of the military aid was absolutely tied to the Ukrainians' enthusiasm and willingness and commitment in writing to investigating the Bidens. So how do they feel like there are no quid pro quo defenses holding up?
I mean, their no quid pro quo defense seems to be that literally no one said, hey, let's do a quid pro quo.
But except the diplomat who said it in writing that we got.
Right, who said he was worried that it seemed like a quid pro quo, and then the other diplomat said, just to be clear,
they're calling Donald Trump.
Yes, this isn't a quid pro quo. But there were people, to Jonathan's point, it's mixed, because the president truly, when he released the transcript, he truly did believe that it was a perfect call. He did believe that it was totally appropriate. And there were people inside the administration who, even before they read the transcript or knew about it, they thought, you know what, I think the president's definition of perfect and totally appropriate is a little different than mine and is a little different than the public's. And so they were worried about that going forward. And so that's kind of the White House defense. And then just to bring it to the Republicans briefly, a lot of their defense is you see a lot of Republican lawmakers getting very squirrely when they're pressed on, do you think this call was appropriate? Would you have asked for the same thing talking to the Ukrainian president? But Republicans will sort of say, I don't think this is impeachable. They don't necessarily condone the content, but they are sort of, their argument is both, I believe he was joking, and that I'm not prepared to say this is ideal, but nor does it reach the level of impeachment.
And just one point. I disagree with Neal on the Sondland, on the way the White House was thinking about the Sondland thing. I don't think they thought this guy was going to bring them down, was going to come in and sort of be very damaging in his testimony. In fact, he has signalled that he's basically going to say very nice things to them. There obviously is the worry about the inconsistency in which, he apparently told Ron Johnson. So no doubt. But it's much bigger than this. The White House is going to put out probably pretty soon their legal guidance for how they're going to handle this, which is basically to delegitimize the whole thing. And they believe by sending anyone to the Hill, they give it some little, a bit of approval or legitimacy. And it's much bigger. They just want to say, to hell with you guys. We're not cooperating. We're not getting involved in this. And maybe there were people who were concerned about Sondland. It's very possible about that one thing, but it's much bigger. They don't want to legitimize what's going on. I don't disagree
with the idea that Sondland was going to try and intend to be helpful. He's the $1 million man. Right. After all, he donated $1 million to Trump's inauguration. But I think the problem is in any law enforcement or law enforcement-like investigation, when you have a witness testify who's going to try and tell the truth as best they can, there's going to be contradictions with other record evidence and the like, and you start to generate and pierce. I mean, the White House's story has fallen apart time and time again over the last week. It started with, this is all hearsay, I didn't do it. Then it was, the transcript's beautiful and perfect. Now the transcript's not so beautiful and perfect. So every new thing is actually, so far, every turn in the cycle has actually been one that's hurt the president.
All I'm saying is it seems to me their motivation is to delegitimize the investigation and not to cooperate in any way.
Well, and I guess the only thing is they should have tried that before it had nearly 60% public support. The Mueller investigation never had 60% of the American public eager to see the facts play out in front of them. And to that point, it's another call from inside the House. As soon as we sat down, New York Times breaking the news that Trump's Ukraine call was, quote, crazy and frightening. That's according to an official that spoke to the whistleblower, whose entire 7-page account has largely been corroborated by Donald Trump's own disclosures and confessions, and that transcript that Donald Trump's White House released, memorializing and corroborating the whistleblower's version of it. Let me read a little bit from this story by Nick Fandos. A White House official who listened to President Trump's July phone call with Ukraine's leader described it as, quote, crazy, quote, frightening, and completely lacking in substance related to national security. That's according to a memo written by the whistleblower at the center of the Ukraine scandal, a CIA officer who spoke to the White House official. The White House official was, quote, visibly shaken by what had transpired. The CIA officer wrote in his memo, one day after Mr. Trump pressured President Zelensky of Ukraine in a July 25th phone call to open investigations that would benefit him politically. A palpable sense of concern had already taken hold among at least some in the White House that the call had veered well outside the bounds of traditional diplomacy, the officer wrote. I mean, this is more corroborating evidence, and this would indicate why the Trump-appointed Inspector General of the intelligence community stamped this whistleblower's complaint as both credible and urgent once he started digging into the whistleblower sources.
Sure. The Inspector General is hearing from the men and women in the CIA or, in the intelligence community who either heard the call or spoke to people who heard the call or saw a readout of the call. And it is, as they say in this article, crazy and frightening.
Yeah.
This is not the way diplomacy is conducted. And while we do ask our allies for things in return for aid, it's never personal political favors, right? We may condition aid on their advancing some...
It's usually on, advancing democracy or giving women rights. It's usually not dirty up Joe Biden's son.
Exactly. And so anybody who would have seen this or heard about it should have gone to the Inspector General with precisely this information. This is troubling, deeply so.
You know, Jonathan Swan, you can't help but sort of recognize the patterns. John Bolton resigned recently, or left under whatever version you choose to accept, over the president's, you know, alarming idea of having the Taliban at Camp David 3 days before the anniversary of 9/11. The aides on the NSC staff, I think it was H.R. McMaster and Dina Powell, who were in the Oval when Russian diplomats Sergei Kislyak and Lavrov were in there talking about Comey being a nut job and talking about having pressure relieved on them, were so alarmed by that call, and their way of sort of pointing to Trump not disclosing intelligence was to suggest that they hadn't given it to him. I mean, this idea that he's acting crazy and frightening with national security officials is the thread that runs through all of Trump's interactions with foreign leaders.
Yeah, and people inside the White House, current and former, have different reactions. That's when you often asked on this show, why do people stay, right? There are some people who do believe, as this White House official told the whistleblower, that the president's behavior was crazy and frightening, and some people use that to justify staying, that I can be a guardrail, that I may not be able to change everything, but I can be there to make sure that this one thing doesn't go off course, or make sure it goes off course a little later than it would have otherwise. And then there's people who, at a certain point, for whatever the issue is, they hit their limit and they leave, and they say, I cannot countenance this, and so I'm either leaving the White House, I'm going into the private sector, or I'm becoming a whistleblower, I'm sharing information with a whistleblower. But I do think that helps explain some of the behavior of current and former officials, how they're reacting to an environment that they often at times find quite alarming.
Go ahead. I was going to say there's a little difference, or quite a difference, between something that is crazy and frightening, which this New York Times story is about, and something that's about personal presidential self-interest and subordinating American foreign policy. One is one that maybe the voters voted for in 2016, knowing some of the cray.
On display at every MAGA rally.
Exactly. But the other, this self-interest and done in secret. Trump's plan was to do all of this with Ukraine in secret, and indeed his Justice Department hid all this evidence from the people, and it took this whistleblower to have it come out. That's something that's fundamentally different. That's what I think why the impeachment thing has such legs, because that is really the textbook definition of what is an impeachable offense, the president subordinating American foreign policy to his personal interests.
I think it also explains why former national security advisors are nowhere. I mean, if he were really innocent of anything that the whistleblower had attested to, wouldn't H.R. McMaster show up somewhere saying, I was on dozens, hundreds of calls and meetings with Donald Trump with foreign leaders? He would never do that. Wouldn't Dina Powell show up and say, I was on dozens of calls? I mean, wouldn't Mattis come up and say, for all that I saw, and we disagreed on Syria policy, which he went ahead and did anyway. I mean, not one person,
He's got
except Rudy Giuliani, has come out and said Trump wouldn't do this.
Well, let me broaden your theory a little bit more. I agree with you, by the way. If this was normal, if this is the way diplomacy worked, you would expect individuals from both parties who've served many presidents to say, no, slow down. This happens all the time.
They said the opposite. Peter Baker wrote a story yesterday. They said the opposite.
Precisely. It's the opposite, and Peter Baker's right.
Hey there, I'm Chris Hayes from MSNBC. Thanks for watching MSNBC on YouTube. If you want to keep up to date with the videos we're putting out, you can click subscribe just below me, or click over on this list to see lots of other great videos.